Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Geezerology Roundtable. Today, we're going to start on a journey to review the discography of a band from the late 60s, early 1970s called Bloodrock out of Fort Worth, Texas. Today, we're going to talk about their self-titled debut album, which was released by Capitol Records on April 25th, 1970. And I'll let Bob kick us off on this one. Take it away, Bobby.
All right. Thank you, Scotty. So welcome to the world of hard rock, proto-metal, psychedelia from deep in the heart of Texas. And casual listeners to Bloodrock probably know them best for their kind of morbid, creepy song called DOA, which came on a subsequent album. But if that's all that you know about Bloodrock, you owe it to yourself to dig into their discography, especially their debut album, which I think is probably their strongest effort. And interestingly, this album was produced by Terry Knight, who was the manager and producer for Grand Funk Railroad. And not only did Knight produce the 9 songs on this album, he also designed that splatter cover that's on it. So, and Bloodrock, released their albums through Capitol, same record company that Grand Funk Railroad was with. This is an interesting band. They're not necessarily breaking any new ground here, but what they do really, really well. And this is a deliciously morbid album. It's got some kind of dark themes to the songs. Lee Pickens, their lead guitarist, he's not creating new sonic sounds like Hendrix would have, but he's really good guitarist, and he knows when to put in the right licks, the right riffs, and he feeds that lead guitar work through the songs admirably. Jim Rutledge, vocalist and drummer for this band, great hard rock voice. If I were to ding this album, I might ding him for the ballads. I don't think he's got a voice really suited for ballads. This is a hard rock vocalist, and he does that very, very well. 5 songs on this album go past 5 minutes. They're kind of lengthy. The album kicks out with a blistering song, Gotta Find a Way. I think it's one of my favorite cuts on the album. It's kind of a cross between Steppenwolf and Deep Purple. They blend in some organ material like Deep Purple. And supposedly, somewhere at the beginning of that song, there's some backward masking stuff. I can't confirm that. I've never spun it backwards to try to find out, but that's what I've heard.
I have proof. I have proof.
Hold on a minute.
I pulled this and ran it through a process, and I played this thing backwards.
Anyone who is stupid enough to play this record backwards deserves what he is about to hear.
You have to listen really close. What he says is, anyone who is stupid enough to play this record backwards deserves what he is about to hear.
Anyone who is stupid enough to play this record backwards deserves what he is about to hear.
I remember reading that now somewhere, that's what that message was. So Bloodrock, they kind of mix elements of hard rock, proto heavy metal. There's some psychedelia thrown in here. And so they're kind of following a path that some other people paved before them. So they're not necessarily, I think, as I said at the beginning, innovators or breaking new ground, but it's an enjoyable band, especially this album. And what they do, I think they do really well. So it's a real nice throwback to that early 70s hard rock, heavy metal type sound. I think they deserved probably a better, wider audience than they necessarily got. But Yeah, I would recommend you check this out if you are interested in that era's music and the genre that they dip their toes into. And like I said earlier, it's kind of a dark, morbid album. There's some of their follow-up stuff. They got a little lighter with their material, but this is an interesting album, and I definitely think you should check it out.
D, what do you have to add?
Well, I'm going to be in the minority on this one. It had been many, many years since I've listened to this record. I did have their second LP, of course, with the probably their most popular song to the general public, DOA. And I went back to this, and it's, it's good. It's right in that lane that Bob just mentioned, kind of the blues rock, hard rock lane. They're from Fort Worth, Texas. So they've got that little, edge and inspiration to them. But I thought it was, fast forward 50 years or so, and I just kind of go, meh. There's some interesting things on here. In fact, the very first cut, the first song is probably my favorite, Gotta Find a Way. It does get things off and rolling really well. And the vocalist drummer, Jim Rutledge, has I think his range is limited. It's good in a very narrow blues rock vein. I thought that some of the songs, they could have been edited down to half their length, particularly I think Timepiece, and then the one song, and I know probably some other folks on side two, that fantastic piece of architecture in Melvin Laid an Egg. They have their moments, but I think it kind of reminded me of something that the Doors would do. And I don't know if they were inspired by that or was unconscious copying. Their overall sound kind of reminded me of between, the organ and keyboards and that sort of like a Deep Purple-ish overall cast to their sound. And once again, as Bob did point out, there it tends to be sort of morbid, almost not depressing, but definitely, if you're looking for melancholy, this is it. And Timepiece is a song about a prisoner that's waiting, looking at the clock, waiting to go to the gallows. And so if that's sort of your genre, that's great. All this time later, this album, and I have plenty of blues rock albums. This just doesn't do it for me, and I think it's because, and this is just subjective, is that there's a lack of vocal variety. There's one song where there is a backing vocal, but I thought it was kind of weak. It just sort of it just wore on me a little thin. So that's without taking a too deep dive, cut by cut. That's where I see this one. Although I think for maybe hard rock, precursor of metal, this is, I guess it's sort of supposedly it's been an inspiration for metal bands that came along in the 90s or whatnot. But
Wow. This we have a little twist on what usually happens with our discussions here. I freaking love this album to this day. I love this thing. Bob says okay. D doesn't like it, man. I think this thing is fabulous. But I do not think this is the best Bloodrock album. I think they put out a couple albums later that I like better. But this one is a little bit different than the ones that they did subsequently. This does have a little darker feel to it than what I do later, despite what's going to come on Bloodrock 2 is DOA, which we'll get to later. But this one, I just love this thing. And what neither Bob or Dee mentioned is this. I don't. Well, let me back up. I don't really hear a whole lot of blues rock. I think I mean, yeah, there's a little blues rock going on here. Pretty much everything that had lead electric guitars back in this day had some element of blues rock in it. But I wouldn't really identify this as any kind of a blues rock album. This more to me, this is really to me kind of Black Sabbath light. You know, it's Black Sabbath just with their debut album, and I don't remember the timeline. They probably had a second album by the time the Bloodrock album came out. So Black Sabbath was out there, and people were starting to pull some things from Black Sabbath. But this to me, I would call this proto metal. You know, this is a lot of people's. There are a lot of folks who do draw a line from wherever back to what became heavy metal during this into the 80s, and they say this is kind of an early version of that. I would call it. There are some elements here. The big element here that developed into metal, I think, is Lee Pickens' lead guitar. To me, Rutledge and Lee Pickens are the stars of this record, and Pickens is all about the riffs. You know, I wrote about this band on our blog at Geezerology.com quite a while ago, and I talked about this where Pickens throughout Bloodrock's career, all these songs are just built on these just monster looping riffs that Pickens throws out there. They put them really high in the mix. There's nothing really complex or anything about it, but it's basically I would almost say that it's like Keith Richards meets Tony Iommi. It puts sort of the slithering dark sound to the guitar, but these are kind of if you listen to a lot of Rolling Stones and Keith Richards is all about the riff. Well, this is Lee Pickens is all about the Keith Richards like riffs with a Tony Iommi sound to it, right? His guitar riffs are all over this album. Dee mentioned that a song Timepiece and Melvin Laid an Egg. He thinks they could be cut in half. Well, what these are, why these songs are 6 minutes and 7.5 minutes long, is they just give it over to Lee Pickens and just let him roll on his riffs just over and over and over again. I love it. I think it's great. It's like, if 3 minutes of these songs are just fade outs with 3 minutes of Lee Pickens riffs, it's just the repetition of these just aggressive guitar riffs, I think, is what makes these things great. I just this is head-banging heavy metal stuff here. This is where if you want to look at maybe where heavy metal may have came from, this Lee Pickens guitar work here is a nice forerunner of that. The other thing I want to mention too is that on this album in particular, they kind of lightened up on this a little later as they went along, but on this album in particular, there's a whole lot of what we call proto-prog on this. Back in the mid-late 60s, it wasn't called prog then. It's like psychedelic acid rock or whatever, but bands like Strawberry Alarm Clock, there was something. If you look at the history of prog rock, they say a lot of this started at this in this town called Canterbury, England, where some bands came out with it was really psychedelic and sort of this druggy haze to it. A band called Soft Machine was probably the most well-known band that came out of the scene. There's a whole lot of that influence here. especially in the song "Fantastic Piece of Architecture," which is just this is the only song on the album that really isn't built around a Lee Pickens riff. This song is built around Stevie Hill's organ. Just his organ is like front and center on this thing. It's just a slow, sort of hazy song built around this creepy little organ riff. And that's a song that could have been cut in half. That's the weak part of this album, I think. Just because it doesn't really seem to fit, because everything here is about Lee Pickens' guitar, except for this 8.5-minute song. It's built around this organ riff, and it's just kind of slow and creepy and a little too long. Timepiece, the song that Dee mentioned, this to me is one of my highlights of the album. My highlights of the album are the two closing songs on each side, Timepiece and Melvin Laid an Egg. Timepiece is actually a cover. Timepiece is a cover of a song that was recorded about a year earlier than this by a Canadian band called The Churls. The song was written by Churls guitarist Hal Ames and their vocalist Robert O'Neill. And this is a band that got signed to A&M Records, and for some reason it didn't work out, and they kind of went away after a year or two. They didn't do much, but they did release one album, and A&M tried to sell it, but nobody ever heard of it. And the only reason that people even know that Charles existed are Bloodrock fans who went and researched where the song Timepiece came from. And I went and listened to it. I went and found it on streaming, and I listened to the Charles version of Timepiece, and the Bloodrock cut is pretty much, it's a pretty faithful version of it. Bloodrock pretty much sticks to the original sound and arrangement of the song, except they add a whole lot more guitar riffs than the Charles actually put in here. Another strange thing about Bloodrock, unique thing about Bloodrock here, is they had a guy who was a friend of the band, who was also from Austin, Texas. He was a guitar player. He recorded a couple albums himself. Never went anywhere, but he sort of had a parallel career with Bloodrock, but Bloodrock actually had a pretty good career for about 2 years. They recorded, they released about 4 albums in 2 years, and they did pretty well. They sold pretty well. They got a pretty good following, especially around the Midwest and in Texas. I know when I was a kid in high school, at least among my friends, this band was pretty big among my circle. But anyway, back to the original point. A guy named John Nitzinger, who was a guitar player and a composer, well, he writes 3 of the tunes on this album. He doesn't appear on this album. He doesn't appear on any Bloodrock albums, but over the course of the 4 classic Bloodrock albums, Nitzinger writes about half of the songs that they did. He never recorded with them, he never played with them, but he was a friend of the band. And I guess that he probably he didn't really have a successful recording career or a music career, but I guess he had a pretty good couple of years where he got some of his songs out there. He did not write DOA, but I'm sure that he made a bit of coin with the songs that he wrote with the Bloodrock albums that sold pretty well. Wicked Truth, which opens side 2. There's somebody who does a second lead vocal on Wicked Truth. We don't know who that is. We don't credit that. Everybody in the band is credited with backing vocals behind Jim Rutledge. We don't know which one of these guys does that second lead vocal, but it's not very good. I agree with Dee. That wasn't very good at all. I don't know. I love this album. It's one. Bloodrock is one of these bands where I used to listen to them a lot for a couple of 3 years, like as around the time in my senior year in high school, and after I graduated from high school. That's when were at their peak. And I was one of their biggest fans, and I listened to them for a while, and I'll put them away. I'll go away for a while, and I'll come back every few years. I'll come back and listen to a Bloodrock album, and every time I do that, I just dive right. I take a dive right back into them, and I spend 2 or 3 weeks. I can't. I don't want to listen to anything else. That's one of those. They're one of those earworm bands for me, man. I hear them, and I can't get enough of them for 2 or 3 weeks. And this one and the subsequent 3 albums are all, I think, are all just lovely albums. And Jim Rutledge, they're a 5-piece band here. Jim Rutledge plays the drums and is the lead singer. Starting with their second album, right after this album was recorded, they brought in another buddy from Fort Worth to play the drums, and Rutledge just went out on stage front, became just strictly the lead singer and front man. So they became a 6-piece band after this album. Yeah, great stuff. I love it. If you like the hard rock, and if you like, if you go back, you put them in the same class, like Bob and Dee said. Deep Purple, Grand Funk Railroad was in the same class, where it's just all guitar heavy, drums heavy, bass heavy, riff heavy, hard rock. It's all it is, and it's glorious. It's glorious stuff. Check it out, everybody. Any final thoughts?
Yeah, let me do a little clarification, if I may, because Scott, I think you might have maybe misinterpreted me. I like this band. I enjoyed listening to them. Not quite the same level of praise that you give them, but this album has been my choice here over the last few weeks for my workout music. So I like hard rock. I like guitar rock. And while I said earlier that Lee Pickens may not be an innovator, he is a very good guitarist. And I love the way he weaves those riffs and leads in and out of the music. My fault with Bloodrock is they're not necessarily, I think, innovative. They're we keep talking about, we're comparing them to Deep Purple, Black Sabbath, some of these other bands. And it almost seems to me like when these guys got together, it's like, hey, man, I really, really dig Deep Purple. Okay, well, let's do some organ stuff then. And I like this and I like that. And they took those elements and they put them together, and they do it all. They do it very well, and it's fun to listen to. It's just not necessarily innovative.
Well, no, I don't think anybody ever claimed that they were innovative. Right. So they're highly derivative.
Yeah, they're very derivative.
They take a little bit from Black Sabbath. They take a little bit from Soft Machine. Right. They take a little bit from here and from there, from the Rolling Stones. Lee Pickens is, like I say, a cross between Keith Richards and Tony Iommi. The innovation is that they take all these little elements and just make a mismatch of things. And
I agree. What they do really, really well. Yeah. Of all those elements they put together, and I'm a closet, Grand Funk Railroad is my guilty pleasure, and I still listen to Grand Funk to this day, and I crank the volume up and become a teenager again, and this is what I do with this. And so I like Bloodrock. I think they're good, just with those couple little minor things. But yeah, I enjoy listening to it. And back in the day, I wore out my album with DOA. I just thought that was such a cool song back in the day, and then I managed to pick up on some other Bloodrock stuff and realize that they were much more than just DOA. So even though this album is probably more morbid than the one that DOA came off of, which is kind of an interesting, but no, I would recommend you to check them out. They're definitely worth listening to. So.
Final thoughts, Dee?
Yeah, there was a brief, narrow period where I was really into Bloodrock, particularly their second album, and they had the same manager with Grand Funk Railroad. Did they have similar sounds? yeah, you could make a case for it, I think. But yeah, I'll just leave it where I mentioned before. Good band, but it didn't wear well with me. That's all I can say.
Jim Rutledge. Let me just get one more thing in about lead singer Jim Rutledge. He's got a strong voice. He carries these songs very well. It's not a voice with a lot of range. It's not a versatile voice. I mean, he's pretty much just a one note. When I say one note singer, I mean, he doesn't have a big bag of tricks. He just goes in and he sings the songs, and there's no there's not a lot of range here, but it's a strong voice, and it carries these songs well. He's a good front man. He's a good front man here, I think, and it was probably a good move on their part. I believe it was Terry Knight's actually idea to go ahead and put him out front, get him from behind the drum kits and put him out front, and then bring in another drummer because he's kind of a big, strapping, Adonis looking guy with real long hair that went to his back, and kind of that Mark Farner look. He and Mark Farner had the same look, had this pretty much the same kind of just strong but limited voice. They're both similar singers. And Rutledge, I think Rutledge's voice had sort of a southern rural tone to this song, to this music, that gives it another dimension. Well, thanks for listening, everybody. We're going to come back and do the like I say, there were 4 albums in the Bloodrock classic era before they just kind of fell apart and went a different direction. But I'm hoping we can get to all 4 of these, because I have different things to say about each. So I think each of the 4 albums are a little bit different. So we'll come back and revisit. We'll come back with Bloodrock 2, which was I think they're probably their biggest selling album. We'll come back with that in a few weeks, and just keep your eye on us. Thanks for listening, everybody. We'll talk to you later. So long.